Olá, tudo bem? Hoje a gente está começando aqui no videocast a fazer entrevistas em inglês também. Caso você não entenda inglês, você pode clicar no botãozinho de legendas para te ajudar a acompanhar. E espero que vocês gostem. Então, agora eu vou começar a falar inglês. Vamos torcer para que dê tudo certo. So, hello, we are here today for a new episode of our videocast. And we're going to be talking about Childfree and reclaiming matriarchy. And I'm going to introduce myself and do a self-description, and then I'll pass it on to our special guest of today, who's Talia. So I am Andressa Stout. I am a woman. I have short hair. I'm wearing glasses, a headphone, and behind me there is a closet. So, Talia, if you can describe yourself a little bit and introduce yourself, then we're going to start our talk today. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you, Andressa, for having me. My name is Talia Molé, and I am a Caribbean queer woman. I have my hair in a French braid. I wear glasses. I am wearing a tan tank top, and behind me is a wall with a lot of pictures of children and their mothers and my mother and all that good stuff. And you'll see every now and then that I have a fan to fan myself because it's very hot here.
Okay. Feel free. And tell us a bit about yourself. What do you study? What is your work about? Who are you?
Sure. So I like to present myself these days as an artist, activist, anthropologist, and word doula. My work mainly focuses right now on queering motherhood and basically pushing on language a lot, especially the language around motherhood, and creating spaces where we can allow liberatory worlds to flourish. I can describe that a little bit more through questions. That might be very complex right now to hold.
Yeah.
But, I think your questions will allow me to.
Okay.
To explain.
So maybe we can start with the theme of this episode, which is child-free and reclaiming matriarchy. So what is child-free? Let us understand a bit.
Sure. So, I mean, child-free can mean so many things, but I'll explain it through my own personal experience and expression. I am somebody that has always felt that I was a mother. I was born a mother. I have a very specific way of entering into motherhood. And it doesn't include birthing children. And so when I began this work, specifically through my doctoral work, I have a PhD, I came to realize that there's this notion of childless where automatically this feeling and this articulation is superimposed on people that if you don't have children, you automatically are missing something. You are less than. In Spanish, for your Portuguese speaking listeners, they'll understand, we say no te has realizado, meaning you haven't become this full person because you haven't had children, especially if you're seen as a cis female, right? That narrative never sat well with me. And I never felt less than anything. I always felt that this was a choice that I was making, and it was one that fulfilled me, actually, that made me feel complete, really. So I never felt that there was this piece that I was missing. I never felt like I needed to undergo that in order to feel I'm not sure how to translate whole, yeah, but realizada in Spanish is like even more like accomplished. That's the word. Like I have accomplished something, And that's when I realized that there is a big difference between being childless, that automatically assumes that you are missing something or a piece of yourself, to being child free, which really signals the choice. It signals at the choice that we make. It is a choice of mine to not have children in that way, to not birth children. My work specifically talks about all the different ways that we enter into motherhood that do not necessarily solely or only have to include other human beings or other human kids. There's many ways to enter into motherhood, whether it's mothering ideas, or mothering our fur babes, as I like to say, or our animals, or mothering our plants, or mothering other relationships. Mothering it takes a whole different, not only narrative, but engagement and experience. When you think of it as I am child free, as a choice that I make.
Perfect. And then later we can make a connection with that concept with neurodivergent women, because that's our main subject in this video cast. And I know that there's a lot of autistic women or women with ADHD who do not want to have children, especially because some of them, because it's a choice, because they never wanted, but a lot of them because they feel like it might be a burden, it might be too much responsibility. So we can talk more about that later. But let's see the other half of the title of this episode, which is Reclaiming Matriarchy. How do we do that? What is matriarchy? Let me know a little bit.
Sure. So the idea of the matriarchy, or reclaiming matriarchy, it's very centered around the work that I did through my PhD. So, when this idea of motherhood comes up, because I'm an activist anthropologist, right? There is this question um, that's very, very central. It's We don't undertake the job, or if you will, or the traditional position of the anthropologist, which a Western anthropologist was very colonizing, really, right? So in activist anthropology, what is required of us is to be a participant. And so the struggle that I joined, if you will, or the struggle that I wanted to expand upon, was this idea of I've always been a mother, and there's no stage for me to explore that. There is no avenue for me to express that. So, first of all, what does it mean to be a mother in this society, in this patriarchal society? And second of all, when I started to see all these nuances, all these differences, if you will, for lack of a better word, then the activist kind of comes in, kicks in, and says, who else experiences motherhood in the way that I am feeling it? And that's the joining piece, right? Which is why I centered around the LGBTQ community as being a queer woman, but also it turned out to be more than that. And so in my exploration on who gets to be a mother, what does it truly mean to be a mother, being within this very specific community, the LGBTQ community, I started to see, for lack of a better word, trends, or actually practices. Let's call them practices. I started to see practices that were very similar. Another layer is that I also was situated in the BIPOC community, even more specific, the Caribbean community. So the Caribbean community here in Miami, Florida, Caribbean LGBTQ community here in Miami, Florida, and then the Caribbean Latinx Black community in New York. So what I started to see as a common thread in practice were these very horizontal engagements, really, when it came to motherhood. The idea of mothering and being a mother and a child was very connected to community. It was very connected to horizontal relationships. It was very connected to mutual aid, to gift economies, if you will, solidarity economies. So, of course, I started to ask, well, where else have we seen that? And we've seen it in matriarchies. Matriarchies is a very big paradigm shift, unfortunately. And I do have to point to terrible Western male anthropologists. They dedicated a long time to sort of erasing this idea of matriarchies. And some people say matriarchies never existed. Some people say that matriarchies are the opposite of patriarchy, where it's like the woman or the mother is taking dominion or has the power. But when you really understand matriarchies, you start to notice that there is no such thing as this dominance over, because they aren't hierarchies. Matriarchies are not the opposite of patriarchies. And I need to make that very clear. They are a paradigm all on their own. They are very horizontal in relationships. So there's an egalitarian theme. When it comes to governance and choice making, it's all via consensus. Of course, in matriarchies, or I should say matriarchies, tend to be matrilineal, meaning that you follow the vein of the mother, but then they're also matrifocal, meaning that everyone lives around the mother, if you will, or clans are based on this central figure, the grandmother, if you will. And so I was seeing in a lot of our practices, to bring it back to what we were talking about as far as motherhood is concerned, and queer motherhood specifically, I was seeing a lot of practices that if you see the people that we come from, especially taking myself as a Taino and African descent, as a Caribbean woman, a lot of the cultures that are interwoven into who I am had matriarchal practices or were matriarchies. And so it's very interesting to start to see how matriarchy actually survives, regardless of this patriarchal system. And so the reclaiming part is how do we take these practices that have allowed us to survive this very vicious patriarchal system, and how do we enact them and expand upon them to bring a better future for everyone, right? To help birth a thriving future. So this is the piece on the reclaiming matriarchy part.
I'm gonna make a very silly reference, but have you watched the Barbie movie? You haven't, but
I
have
have
you
not.
heard
Yes,
a
yeah.
little about it?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I have.
Yeah, because at least here in Brazil, it was a big hit, and people maybe had this idea that how the world will be if women rule the world. But it's interesting to see that as an anthropologist, that you don't go to this easy way that is just thinking that's the opposite, but it's a very different paradigm. And I'm wondering if you think that people would accept it. How would this shift be possible, like, since we are not in power, at least not as much as we could, like as women. I mean, do you feel like that's gonna happen, this transition? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Honestly, the idea of matriarchies is still very present with us. Matriarchies are very much alive in different areas of the world, in Asia and Africa. even in Europe. So there is this sense really that in order to make a very big shift in the world, it has to happen almost overnight. But I would venture to say, or I would invite I would set the invitation to think to think about change as something that happens gradually. And I must say that when we distance our focus, or when we distance ourselves from patriarchal practices and narratives, we expand the focus, if you will. We start to see that there are many examples of matriarchal living, if you will, moving and resisting within and despite patriarchy, right? So is it something that we can say will happen all at once? Not necessarily. I think that change, especially the one that we're seeking, sort of starts locally, and really it is in the local that you start to see people already doing these different types of things that I've described. You know, people are engaging in more horizontal relationships. People are already seeing, you know, how hard it is to find food to eat. You know, so there's this exchange of solidarity, economies that are based on solidarity, exchange, mutual aid. How do we help each other? How do we take care of each other? And always pushing back on the idea that hierarchies are not good, at least when it comes to our social formations, you know? So I really do feel that matriarchies are already, I mean, they've existed. They've existed forever, and will continue to exist. And I will venture out to say that it is because so many of us, in our DNA, in our practices, we've passed down matriarchal practices, that it's because of that remembrance and that honoring of those matriarchal memories that we've actually survived, you know, up to this. So I feel that the more time we spend practicing, remembering first of all, and then practicing those things, we don't have to look back. I think eventually when we look back, we'll realize, oh, wow, we're so far away from patriarchy. You know, we're so distant from that paradigm, especially when that paradigm, when patriarchy likes to tell you this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it shall always be. And that's a great lie, right?
It's the same with capitalism,
Yeah.
that people say that it's the only way, there's no other way, but there were and there will be, there can be, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, actually, this capitalist system is quite young, to tell you the truth. So, yeah, that there's many revolutions, if you will, going on, right? I think a lot of people think that this revolutionary change is just like you wake up one day and everything is just different, but really, it's just very micro changes that eventually you'll wake up and be like, oh crap.
And
It's
I
not what I
think
expected.
that maybe people feel the need to change our ways, especially during crisis, like during the COVID pandemic. I thought that I think I saw more people coming together and taking care of each other than I've ever seen before. Like in my building, people were helping the elderly to buy food and going to the groceries. I mean, I would like to hear about that, like how crises become opportunities for matriarchal societies to come to grow bigger on us, and also about the language. What is the role of language to help bring more of matriarchal beliefs and ways of being?
Such a good question about, how does a crisis invite us to shift our focus? And I mean, look at me, my work started from a crisis. I was actually quite sick and I needed to have I needed to have my uterus removed. I needed to have an operation and nobody was giving it to me. Um, and out of that crisis, actually, I began to question laws, history, the system. So, this idea that crisis is an invitation for shift is wonderful. Now, how does matriarchy fall into that? I think that the most important thing when we're faced with a crisis is that if you're able to, I don't want to generalize all crises, but if you're able to, at least my experience has been that it allows for this pause and then expansion on where do we go from here. And in that expansion and that question is sort of like a North Star. Where do we go from here? It invites inquiry or questioning, right? It invites you to have to do research. Now, what does that research look like? For many of us, it looked like talking to our ancestors, trying to figure out how we lived before all of this, being in conversations with those stories and seeing first, okay, what answers do we already have? What do we already live with, and then going deeper and digging deeper, right? I think then from there, being able to then formulate possibilities, right? Sitting with the immense possibilities that exist when you need to take that first step forward out of a conflict. But sure, you have to like have done the work, if that makes any sense. And it's a work that you hopefully do collectively, right? As you are in this period of remembrance, and I like to make the distinction of remembrance as a memory, like remembering a memory, but also remembrance as putting yourself back together, putting your your members back together, right? And so that's a beautiful work to do in community, and doing all of that really, I think, spotlights a lot of possibilities, and also understanding that whatever possibilities you and your collective or your community choose to explore, that's also an invitation for more research, for more exploration. So really, I think one way out of conflict is this coming together horizontally, a matriarchal practice, right? And exploring things, exploring more um, solutions, if you will. But I think also one thing that matriarchies are very beautiful at is honoring our interconnectedness, right? Understanding, and what I mean by interconnectedness is that, we all breathe the same air, right? We all share in this collective energy, if you will, however you want to see that. If I'm hurting, you're going to hurt. If we acknowledge that we're connected, right? Acknowledging that whatever processes need to happen to birth a new, better world for all, you're not just doing it for yourself. So it's really distancing yourself away from this idea of the individual, right? The individuality, which is such a key figure in patriarchy, right? Matriarchy says we're all in this together, like literally, right? I think of Abya Yala, which we know as Latin America, but I think of, in Abya Yala we say the we that forms the I, right? Or Ubuntu, and as an African saying, right? That I am because we are, right? So this notion of the community, of that we're all connected, that whatever I do is going to affect everyone, humanity, that's a very beautiful way to walk in the world, and also a beautiful way to assume a particular responsibility out of conflict, if you will. So
Nice. And then you brought this conversation to a point that I wanted to arrive, which is okay, so that's all very beautiful. I like this idea of community, but since there is a lot of beliefs and ways of being that are highlighting individuality, and that if you don't succeed, it's your fault,
oh,
and people want. I mean, this system needs that there are this inequality, and that there are people who are gonna accept to work for you because they need that to survive, and it's important to have minorities, so to make this system continue. Not that I agree with that, but how do you feel like for minorities, how do they survive in this? Because I like the idea that when we bring many circles of minority people together, we become not a minority anymore. It's like we are a lot. There's a lot of people who feel like they are separated and excluded, and that they're not the majority. But if we put people together, then we get some strength. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. I'm gonna pass it on to you.
yeah, I think I get what you're saying. First of all, in activist circles, we like to say that the minority is the global majority, right? And um, as I am a lover of utopias, right? Because I, as a person of color, have actually lived a dystopia. So for me, utopias are a beautiful horizon to set. I'm also a realist, right? So we cannot escape the fact that we are also living within uh, capitalism and patriarchy and imperialist forces, right? That require something of us, right? So there's this dance. I'll speak from my experience. There's this dance that I perform really when I am in a patriarchal environment or under a patriarchal paradigm. I understand the concepts of this is the individual, this is how I am categorized. I don't really see community in patriarchy. I see groups. Groups are not the same as a collective, as a community. Groups are just a bunch of people that in patriarchy fall under some sort of categories, and it's just easier to herd us, if you will, or corral us in order to control, right? So under this paradigm, this hierarchical paradigm of domination, if you will, which is what patriarchy is, um, yes, of course, I advocate for coming together under whatever category you fall within, all the intersections that you move through, right? In order to resist. Resistance is extremely important under this hierarchical um, relationship formation, right? Meaning there's somebody above you. And if there's somebody above you, then they're oppressing you, right? And it is very important to resist that in order to honor our agency and our humanity, right? Um, so I don't want to diminish the the struggles. I myself, am one of those people, and so are you, right? We are people that have to struggle within this system that also means that if we have the capability, whether that means time, access, imagination, we can enact in a very different paradigm. I'd like to quote, if you will, one of my mentors, and I think I see her as one of my spirit guides, Gloria Ansaldúa, who was a Chicana thinker, wonderful essayist as well, creative writer. And she used to say that it's really important to imagine a new reality and to begin to practice this pretend reality. And we practice it so much that one day it'll just be our reality. And I think whenever we can move out of that patriarchal paradigm, if we have the space and we have the security and the safety to do it, to begin to enact with other ways of being and knowing under a different paradigm, that can then um, really offer us a new reality. I mean, as simple as that. I mean, I say as simple as that. Of course, it's not as simple as that. It's just an invitation, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's very wonderful when we have people who inspire us and people who represent something. For instance, I know that there's a lot of women who don't have like a role model to follow. For instance, people who live in very small cities here in Brazil, they don't see other women making this choice of like, I'm not gonna birth a child, I'm gonna be a mother of ideas and I'm gonna make a project and a book or whatever other ways of being a mother. So it's very important that we create space for these other women to speak out and to support them. And yeah, and then I want to return to that topic of the language. So when we are speaking and choosing the right word, that is a way of bringing this paradigm into our practice, right? Your microphone.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That and thank you for bringing it back full circle. I am an immigrant to the United States, and English is my second language. I came when I was 8. Um, and so, yeah, I didn't know any English when I first came here. And so, living in this idea of translation and pushing back on language is very important for me, uh, not just because how do I explain it? Living in translation for me is a space where not only do I get to understand meaning, I also allow myself to push back on language that I don't like, on language that doesn't serve me. And I get to rearticulate things, reconfigure things in the way that I feel this suits best. And so, really, from a very young age, through this idea of translation, I have pushed back on language because although my mother tongue is Spanish, I've also felt not necessarily 100% at home in it. I mean, in many ways, language and English are both, at least for part of the Spanish for part of me, is a colonizer's language, right? But so is English. So for me, I've given myself that permission, right, in translation to say, I don't really like, I don't like that word, and how can I say it differently? Um, one thing that I feel that matriarchy has taught me, going back to the idea of the interconnection between us and nature, is this idea of where in nature is something similar happening, and how can I use the way different systems in nature resolve conflict or just resolve an issue? How can I use that as inspiration in my life so that I can resolve certain conflict or issues within like my communities, right? And do it in a way where life is always centered, right? Because that's what I see in nature. It's the way nature expresses itself at the core is always this beautiful yearning, if you will, to just allow life to happen. And to me, that's really important in my relationships and in my communities. So when a conflict happens, I want to know how I can create these spaces where what is centered is life. I want to honor who you are. I want to honor who we all are. How can your humanity remain intact, right? And so this idea of language is very important. Um, so yeah, how do you push back? But it's not just about necessarily erasing something. It's about where else am I seeing something similar and I can draw inspiration from. And I tend to go to nature for that a lot. And so a lot of the things that, well, my work, motherhood phoenixing, which is the framework that I like to use. I mean, it uses the language of matriarchy, of motherhood, and of queer motherhood, if you will, in order to create spaces, to create relationships, relationship building, but also conflict resolution. How are we engaging with each other? How are we learning from each other? How are we helping each other heal? Um, so yeah, I hope that answers a bit.
It answers and it brings out many more questions, and maybe we could make a connection with my hyper focus with neurodiverse, which is neurodiversity, with the process that LGBT community passed, because I know that not many years ago, like homosexual person was characterized as a person which had like a disease or something, that it is a diagnosis to be a homosexual. And I really like the idea that, for example, an autistic person, a gifted person, is not someone who is diseased, so it shouldn't be in the like DSM, but we are. And yeah, I would like to hear if you know more about that. How was this transition of LGBT community um, getting off of this medical paradigm? You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm an expert at it. I'm not an expert at the DSM, the diagnostic tool that is used to diagnose. But all of that is just jargon. It's just nomenclature that is constantly shifted and uh, through culture and society, right? And again, that I think that is the need, if you will, of a patriarchal society, to have to name an individual, to have to categorize them, um, and there are many. Actually, I mean, the DSM is constantly going through changes because there's so many things that the medical world uh, feels the need to have to name. And, it's also part of capitalism to be able to name or point to somewhere in the DSM means that there's a couple of numbers that then you can bill the insurance company with, and then you could get paid, and your patient or client, however, you see who you're working with. Um, they can get your services. And so there's this very transactional relationship I see also to the DSM. Again, it's all about this very imperialist, capitalist way of engaging in relationship. What a horizontal relationship invites is really this notion, first of all, of even going against this idea of time. I think of the notion of queer time, that queer studies, brings up, if you will. When you are engaging with different types of people, you have to honor their time. When we come together as a community, we usually come together with the same intention. The intention is the same. How we present ourselves, if you will, around that intention, that's what's different. But in a horizontal relationship, what's important is the intention that brought us together. So if you're somebody that needs a certain amount of time to come up with ideas, or you might need to come in and out of the room, or you might need a translator, or whatever reason, there's going to be space for that, because time is not transactional. Time, if you will, is almost part of the relationship making. In these patriarchal groups, when we come in, we're usually in for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. There's a certain time limit. You got to get your ideas out very fast. That's a very, very stress-inducing.
You get paid by the hour.
Yeah, and can you imagine? You know this already. You're already full of stress. You don't know how to everything just becomes a mess inside of you. And I would venture to say that your intentions are not the same. Sometimes a person's intention is, I want to be heard, I want to speak my truth, or whatever. And let's just use the platform of counseling or psychology. The psychologist or the counselor's intention is, okay, I'm going to listen to you, but I also need to get paid. This is my job. I'm not speaking against these modalities. I think they're extremely important. My master's is in counseling, and you're a psychologist, so I mean.
But wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to charge and if we could just listen to people?
And I have to say, I must confess that is actually one of the reasons why I did not continue my journey as a counselor, because for me, although I loved a lot of the things that I learned and the modalities that I was using, like narrative therapy and solution focus, I just realized that I could use those modalities in other things and in other ways. But yeah, the idea of a horizontal relationship really, I feel, is very inviting to different folks, to different expressions of humanity. Because really, in a horizontal relationship, the intention tends to be the same. And usually the intention is also, we all have a truth to share, and it's very different. And so let's open the space for that truth to emerge however it needs to emerge. You're not thinking about the transaction. You're actually thinking about, how do you make the conditions accessible for that truth to emerge?
And when I hear you, I feel like it's much more like allowing creativity to arrive and things are gonna flow. And then I'm thinking that, for instance, I know that there's a lot of autistic people who struggles with that fluidity, like flexibility, and I would like to hear from you, like, how do you see, how could, for instance, an autistic woman who struggles with not having predictability, how could she loosen things up to open herself to this idea of horizontality and community and not knowing exactly what's going to happen? Do you feel like, is there something that could help us? Because I include myself on that.
Absolutely. Well, I have to say, um, in some ways, this is not, I'm not jabbing you or what, but this is really to say that this thinking that you present is it is a bit patriarchal in the sense that in patriarchy we walk assuming that the other person knows about us. What a horizontal relationship requires is ask, what do you need in order to make the space accessible? You don't know until you ask, right? And that, I think, is such a key and beautiful part of a horizontal relationship. There are going to be more questions than supposed answers. Patriarchy positions itself as having the answers to everything, right? And conflict needs to be resolved, or if anything, it needs to be avoided. You know, um, but no, I feel that conflict is one way of signaling that there's just something that's just not congruent. It's just there's something that needs questioning. Question. There are a lot of questions. I think the more questions, the better, because the more questions, uh, you really arrive at a very important articulation of yourself, and not only an articulation of yourself, or I should say, an articulation of yourself that includes your boundaries, right? Because that's also something that's very important that we don't necessarily talk about. You know, boundary setting, I think, is one of the most loving acts that you can possibly do. Setting a boundary um, really says, I'm committed to this relationship. I'm so committed that I want to tell you exactly what gets me going, and what allows me to stay. And I invite you to do the same, right? So I think that the only way I can know how this will, let's say the only way that I can know how a space is going to work for you is by asking you, a- and asking you to tell me. And then of course there's a dialogue, right? That's the idea of a relationship. We start to weave ourselves into the other, because then I tell you what I can give and what I can't. Maybe I can't provide something that you need. And so that also allows us to expand our community, our network, right? I can't give that to you. But what if somebody else can? And so now it's not just you and me. Maybe there's somebody else that we can bring in and become three. And then maybe that person can't necessarily do, something that we require. And now we become four and we become bigger, right? So that would be my short or not so short answer to that.
Yeah, and for me, that connects with this idea of like, the DSM is not really working for us because the doctors, they read, so you are autistic level 1 or you're autistic level 2, and then they assume that they know what we need instead of
Yes.
asking. So that doesn't help. And also, when we say like, okay, I'm gifted, and then people already bring a lot of concepts that they heard about who are gifted. So, you are a genius in math. No, I'm not. I'm the opposite. That doesn't mean that. So I think what you're saying is that we have to be open to the idea of about like we don't know shit. We don't know anything, right?
I think I think that's a beautiful way to put it. We genuinely don't know shit. Genuinely, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I actually believe that that's a wonderful thing because it requires us to engage. However engagement presents to us, or for us, however engagement, however accessible engagement is for us. I think just the important piece of that engagement is to not be afraid to ask questions. We also live in a society where asking questions is seem as dumb. I mean, how many times is a question not answered with, well, you should know that by now, or like you said, how many times do people just hold fast to a stereotype, or something that they read about us like decades ago, and assume they collapse everyone under this myth that they created. And I think that that's very dangerous because, again, it's very focused on the individual. And also, to use a patriarchal word, it castrates us from from that interconnectedness. I mean, really, we were we are social animals. We are social beings. Now, that doesn't mean that we always have to be with somebody, or to, we have to, be in herds and just always be surrounded by people. It just means that we have to talk. We have to engage in order to obtain our information. It's not just about sitting by yourself and figuring it out. You have to talk it out with somebody. It's just part of language formation. Um, Even scientifically, a lot of our hormones are actually enacted by a hug, by just the proximity of somebody, by laughter, by all these different forms of engagement and relationship. So, yeah, questioning is such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't be here because I'm making a lot of questions and I've always liked that. And people always said, but it's becoming like an interview because you keep asking me questions. But that's me. That's not true for me. So now I can do that for free. And I was also thinking about people who have ADHD and how hard it is because we live in a society that all the time is saying to us that you have to be focused and keep focusing. And how would that be like in matriarchal society or matriarchal school? Like if there's a kid who cannot pay attention, maybe we should ask her like, okay, so what interests you, what makes you fascinated, what in which way do you feel like it's easier for you to learn and pay attention? Would that be more asking the student instead of trying to oppress? How would that be? I'm interested.
I think the quickest answer to that is that matriarchies would want to play to what you're able to give, right? There's this saying, you give what you can and you take what you need, right? So matriarchies would work with what you're able to give. And notice I'm not saying strength, right? They're going to play to your strength because I think that that's also something very patriarchal to go into the binary. I'm constantly questioning the binary, right? We're all strong and we're all weak. We all have different intensities to that. But I think matriarchy is just ask the question, what is it that you're able to do? And then we'll play with that, right? As opposed to patriarchies. Patriarchies say, you must do this. And if you don't know how to do this, then you're just a fool. You don't work. You suck, right? So there is this superimposition or a patriarchal system superimposes on you what you need to be doing. And a lot of those things might not be, now using binary language because patriarchy loves the binary, right? Those are probably not your strengths. And so automatically you've already begun uh, uh, in a deficit, right? That's not what matriarchies invite. The only way that we can be strong is if everyone is doing what they're able to do. And if everybody's doing what they're able to do, then we can see what it is that we need and then look for someone that can, you know, uh, um, do that, just offer, if you will, offer that thing that is missing, if you will, in whatever it is that is being enacted in a matriarchal society, right? So yeah, I think that would be my quick answer. Matriarchies really play to what is it that you can provide and do that, and patriarchy just superimposes something on you, and if you can't do it, well, then you're fucked. Pardon my French, but yeah.
And that also makes me think of the how we are taught to behave so we can get us accepted in a job interview, for instance, like you have to be proactive and blah blah blah. And they don't ask like what do you do best and can you focus on that, because we have to have many abilities to do many tasks, so that doesn't really work. And nowadays when I choose to work with someone, I usually try to pair with neurodivergent people. For instance, Gabriela, who is not here today, unfortunately, but she's the other host of this video cast. And we usually respect each other. Like if I am too tired today, maybe she will be upfront to solve something, or maybe my strength is on organization and it's not for her, so let me do this. You don't have to force yourself to do this because that's way too hard for you. And I feel like maybe we are applying some of this matriarchal way of doing stuff. Is that it? Are we on the way?
Absolutely, and of course, it's not just within the business model or business relationship, right? This is also about platonic relationships, intimate relationships, however you want to term your relationships. Uh, this is a perfect and beautiful example. Here are my strengths. I completed that. What are yours? And you can do those. And again, I use the term strength, but what I'm trying to say is this is what I can do. And again, we're coming together with the same intention. In this case, the intention is to create a blog, a video blog, right? Uh, these are the things that we can do around the video blog. Oh, I can handle these, and you can handle, and Gabriela can handle the other. That is collaboration at its best, right? It's not. This is a video blog. You're or somebody dictating to you what to do. You're gonna do this and this and this and this and this. Without necessarily engaging in a conversation to see if number one you want to do that. Can you even do that, right? Those things that are required of you. And that's also very beautiful to see outside of again, not just these I mean, I don't think this is work, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's also beautiful to see it in like romantic relationships or your siblings or your parents, like how are you at home with them? Are you somebody that demands things from your loved ones, or are you there to meet them halfway, right? You see what is needed, and if you're the one that has access to provide those needs, then you show up for that, right? And I think that that's the beautiful thing of um of a community, honestly.
Yeah. And That's very subversive in the way that there is still a lot of men who believe that they have to be the providers and women stay at home. But what if the woman can provide better than the guy, right? So that dichotomy appears in many types of relationships, right?
Yeah, and I also want to say something to that, if I may. You know, under patriarchy, I just want to say that any body can be an agent of patriarchy, right? Role reversals is not a shift in patriarchy. So if in patriarchy we see you have this man, the cis man, or the head. He is the head of the household, right? And provides for the women and the children, right? That's sort of like the most basic form of patriarchy. The flip side, where you know the the gender roles are just reversed, that's still patriarchy, right? So there's really no shift in anything in the system itself, just because the bodies have shifted, right? um, and that's not to say that when you are working within that paradigm, patriarchal paradigm, sure, that's one way of accessing or shifting or providing a need, right? In this case, if the woman is the one that can go out and provide economically, and the man, and I'm using scare quotes, is the one that needs to stay home and take care of the kids, then that's definitely a way of, again, offering a need. But I do want to make that comment that the role reversals, that patriarchy is so um, obsessed, for lack of a better word, with gender roles, right? Each gender, the binary that they love to superimpose on all of us, has its roles, and any deviation from those roles then is an adulteration, if you will, of the institutions and the systems, the various systems that they have.
Religious systems also.
Yeah, that they have created. So
So the revolution is gonna be queer, is that it?
well, I mean, that's actually a good question. The revolution is already starting. The revolution has been going on forever, actually, I would like to say. I think um, the moment anybody felt oppressed, a revolution began, because it's not inherent, really, for us to take oppression for very long. There is going to be a form of resistance, one way or another. And it is in that resistance that the revolution is born. So, really, we've been revolting for a really long time. Sure, queerness is one way to revolt, but I should say not but, and it has a myriad of expressions, right? It has a multitude of expressions.
And I heard somebody told me that you might have a book coming. Would you like to talk a little bit about it?
Yes. So my book, which is a culmination of a lot of what we were talking about, it's called Motherhood Phoenixing: Queer Revelations. Um, I plan on having the final draft already by this month, by this year, and hopefully it'll be published by next year. But it's based on a lot of the work that I did on really collectively reauthoring what motherhood, and mothering means, how we can use it as a framework to birth new worlds that allow us to thrive, that allow us to live with joy, and collectivity, if you will. Um, but yeah, that book will be out next year, and there's a lot of beautiful expressions and experiences of mothers and motherhoods and practices of mothering that we wouldn't necessarily, unfortunately, characterize as such under patriarchy. But as we've been talking about matriarchies today, you can see that they make sense. So
Is there gonna be a version of this book in Portuguese and many languages?
well, I mean, that would be amazing. As soon as I get it published, I would love for it to be translated for sure. I think it's um, yeah, that would be beautiful. That would be absolutely beautiful. We could talk about the Portuguese version once it gets published.
Well, and for me, it's an honor to bring you to this video cast because it's a way to Brazilian people get to know you because I had this privilege. We worked together, and but I don't wanna keep you just for myself. I wanna share you with more people. So thank you for coming.
No, thank you so much for having me. I mean, we've known each other for so long and we've seen each other just grow. This word phoenixing, I sort of coined it in my work, just phoenixing really is about this transformation by fire that we're constantly undergoing. And I definitely have seen a lot of your phoenixing as you have witnessed mine. And it's just very beautiful to arrive at this moment together and see our growth and our joy. And yeah, so thank you so much, my love. It was a pleasure to be here today.
Well, so now we're gonna say our goodbyes, and if you have any final word that you would like to say, otherwise we're gonna start like saying goodbyes and see you next episode. But if you want to say anything, feel free.
No, just that. It was a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to your continued success, yours and Gabriela's. Gabriela, I missed you, but I'll see you next time if there's a next time. And yeah, much, much love and success to both of you. Thank you for
Okay,
having me.
yeah. We hope that you come back because we can talk a lot about so many things, and it's really great to talk to somebody who understands of anthropology and has a very collective way of seeing things. So that's very, very valuable for us. So thank you again, and thank you everybody who watched us and listened to us. And we'll be here soon with Talia and other guests. So stay tuned. Thank you. Bye bye.